Have you ever wondered what would happen if someone borrowed your garden hose without asking, again, and ended up screaming, drenched in a fountain of compost tea and goat runoff? Well, let me introduce you to Celeste, queen of the clipboard, president of our neighborhood self-appointed HOA, and a woman who smells like cucumber melon and blind entitlement. Picture her, soaked head to toe in liquid fertilizer, howling like she just stepped into a haunted septic tank. It sounds like something out of a bad sitcom, right? Wrong. This was real. It happened right here, on my property, under the warm rays of a peaceful suburban sun. But before you ask how I managed to turn a simple hose into a tool of poetic justice, let me take you back to the beginning. 6 months ago, I moved to what I thought was a quiet, semi-rural patch of land just outside the city limits. A slice of peace, a place where I could grow tomatoes, raise goats, and live far away from corporate meetings and people named Chad talking about brand synergy. My closest neighbor? A quarter-mile away. Or so I thought. Turns out the real neighbor I needed to worry about wasn't next door. She was across the road, at the faux HOA headquarters, plotting her next unsolicited inspection, her next violation letter, and eventually her own downfall. Welcome to the garden hose war. Buckle up. It started, like all great neighborhood horror stories do, with a trespass disguised as a casual greeting. I was knee-deep in chicken coop supplies, sleeves rolled, sun on my back, when Celeste waltzed into my yard without so much as a knock. She didn't announce herself. She didn't pause. She just walked in, like she was strolling through her own royal estate, and headed straight for my outdoor faucet. I froze, hose in hand, halfway between confusion and disbelief. "Hi, you must be the new neighbor," she chirped, her voice dipped in honey, but sharp enough to slice through drywall. Before I could even return the pleasantry, she had turned the faucet on and started dragging my hose toward her yard. "Just need a quick rinse for my roses," she added, waving me off like a pesky fly. "Our community taps a bit low pressure. You don't mind, right? It's all shared water anyway." Shared water? Now, let me be perfectly clear. My property runs on a private well, not city water, not community resources. A privately drilled, fully updated, out-of-my-pocket well system. But in that moment, with a chicken coop half assembled and my new homeowner patient still intact, I gave her a tight smile and said nothing. I let it go, chalked it up to small-town quirkiness, and made a mental note. Buy a hose lock. I wasn't ready to start a neighborhood war on day one, but I should have known. Celeste was just getting warmed up. The very next morning, I walked outside feeling accomplished, ready to admire my small victory in home security. A shiny new hose lock gleamed in the sun, clipped neatly over the nozzle. It wasn't anything fancy, just a basic combo lock meant to keep out curious raccoons or overreaching neighbors. But what I found made my stomach turn. The lock wasn't missing, it was destroyed. Snapped clean in half like someone had taken bolt cutters straight through it. At first, I questioned myself. Had it broken on its own? Maybe I installed it wrong? But when I checked the security footage, all those doubts evaporated. There she was, Celeste, in broad daylight, no disguise, no hesitation. Wearing floral garden gloves and humming to herself like she was in a perfume ad, she waltzed up to my faucet, snipped the lock like it was a dead twig, and tested the water with her fingers as if sampling a fine wine. Then she casually walked off with the hose trailing behind her, as if vandalizing private property was just part of her weekend routine. I confronted her later that day. "Did you break my hose lock?" I asked as directly and calmly as I could manage. She didn't even flinch, just raised an eyebrow and said, "It was a safety hazard. Someone could trip over it." Then, with a huff of indignation, she added, "Besides, why would you lock shared resources?" That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with a misguided neighbor. I was dealing with a tyrant in yoga pants who had no concept of boundaries and absolutely no shame. That night, I dove into the HOA bylaws with the same energy I once reserved for engineering schematics. I wanted answers. No, I needed leverage. And buried somewhere between Clause 3.2.7 on acceptable fence heights and Section 4.1.1 titled Seasonal Reef Limitations, I found my gold mine, a line stating, in clear legalese, that the HOA had no right to access, regulate, or utilize private wells under any circumstance. None. Zip. Zilch. And according to county ordinance, any unauthorized use of a private water source wasn't just frowned upon, it was theft. I nearly laughed out loud. Karen, sorry Celeste, had been trespassing and committing a crime, all while acting like the queen of neighborhood order. Armed with this knowledge, I marched straight to the next HOA board meeting, folder in hand. Proof at the ready. But when I brought up to the board, you'd think I'd announced I was planning to start a chicken fighting ring in my backyard. The room fell silent. Celeste, perched smugly at the head of the table, tilted her head and said in her sickly sweet voice, "Let's not escalate things. Water is a communal good. After all, maybe consider being a little more neighborly." Neighborly? Right. Like snapping a lock is neighborly. Like trespassing onto private land is just part of the welcome committee package. And then it came, the formal letter, a citation for creating a hostile environment and uncooperative behavior regarding shared community needs. Attached to the complaint, a literal photo of her using my hose. Proof, apparently, that I was non-compliant. That's when the penny dropped. If Celeste wanted to treat my private well like a public fountain, fine. But next time she turned that handle, she wasn't going to get what she expected. It was time for a little education. Not vengeance, not exactly. Just a firm lesson in boundaries, courtesy of my homestead's most underappreciated feature, the compost system. You see, one of the unique benefits of raising goats, chickens, and managing an organic garden is the abundance of rich, nutrient-heavy runoff. Perfect for soil. Not so perfect for designer yoga pants and pretentious hydrangeas. So I got to work. I spent the weekend re-engineering my setup, rerouting the exterior spigot through a dual-valve connection. One valve led to clean well water. The other, activated with a hidden switch, redirected the flow straight from the compost overflow tank. It was legal. It was sanitary. But the smell? Absolutely biblical. And just to keep things above board, I labeled it all. Private agricultural use only. The sign read, laminated, weatherproofed, zip-tied right under the faucet. Bold red letters. No ambiguity. If Celeste came back, it wouldn't be an accident. It'd be willful ignorance. And that's exactly what I was counting on. I didn't have to chase her down or yell across the yard. I didn't have to file another complaint that would be buried by her book club cronies on the board. All I had to do was wait and fertilize. The trap was set. And as if summoned by fate, or perhaps by the irresistible pull of someone else's resources, Celeste returned just 2 days later. It was early morning. Birds were chirping. Coffee was still hot in my mug. And there she was like clockwork, gliding across my yard in her pastel gardening gloves with a smug little smirk and an empty watering can. She glanced at the laminated sign, but didn't stop. Of course not. Warnings didn't apply to her. She turned the faucet, and I flipped the hidden valve switch from inside my kitchen with a flick of the wrist, never breaking eye contact with the security feed on my phone. The effect was immediate and unforgettable. A sputter, a gurgle, and then a thick, bubbling stream of compost-infused liquid burst from a nozzle like an exorcism. It sprayed across her white linen blouse, her pearls, her prize rose bushes, and her face. The scream that followed, it echoed to the neighborhood like a banshee had been set on fire. She flailed, slipped on the slick grass, and landed with a loud squelch right in the puddle she created. Her little poodle bolted in terror, disappearing behind a hedge. And me? I nearly choked on my coffee, laughing so hard tears ran down my cheeks. It was chaos. Glorious, smelly, karmic chaos. And I had it all recorded in high definition. But if you thought that would be the end of it, that maybe, just maybe, a full body soaking in fermented goat waste would be enough to humble Celeste, you clearly don't know her breed of entitlement. That same afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting. Not next week. Not in 48 hours. That same day, she printed notices and plastered them on community mailboxes like we were bracing for a hurricane, titled in dramatic bold font, "Community Crisis, ACT of Biohazard Sabotage." I showed up fashionably late, coffee in hand, still wearing my garden boots. Her backyard was now scrubbed and lemon-drenched in a hopeless attempt to erase the crime scene. Celeste stood at the center like a dethroned monarch, draped in a shawl like a courtroom plaintiff, clutching a Ziploc bag of contaminated water, which, to be clear, was her own evidence of trespassing. Her speech was a masterpiece of deflection. She called me a threat to female leadership, claimed I'd weaponized agriculture, and, my favorite, accused me of chemical terrorism, all while ignoring the glaring fact that she trespassed, stole water, and tampered with someone else's irrigation system. But this time, the crowd didn't clap. The board members looked awkward. One even stifled a laugh. And when I calmly reminded everyone of my permits, the private well status, the inspection-ready compost system, and, oh yeah, the county notice she accidentally had delivered to my address about her own illegal irrigation line, the room turned. Fast. A retired attorney on the board leaned forward, adjusted his glasses, and said, "That might constitute trespassing, Ms. Celeste." She went silent. No defense. No finger wagging. Just a twitch of her perfectly plucked eyebrow. From that moment on, the power dynamic flipped like a bad pancake. Celeste's once-iron grip on the HOA board began to melt under the heat of actual accountability. For months, she had ruled through intimidation, weaponizing fines, nitpicking garden decor, and slapping citations on anyone who dared breathe in the wrong direction. But now, with her dirty laundry aired in front of the very neighbors she had lorded over, the spell was broken. The murmurs started immediately. She'd been doing this for years. Remember when she fined the Hendersons for sidewalk chalk? I always wondered how her lawn was that green during a drought. The whispers grew into questions. The questions turned into doubt. And then came the knockout punch. I pulled out the HOA charter and pointed to clause, one so rarely cited, it may as well have been written in invisible ink. Section 6B. It clearly stated that any board member found in violation of county code could be suspended by community vote. I read it aloud. Slowly, deliberately, the room went silent. Celeste's jaw tightened. And when it came time for the vote, the result wasn't even close. Out of 15 active members, 11 voted to suspend her indefinitely. The rest? They abstained, mostly out of sheer awkwardness. Not even her most loyal minions could defend her at that point. Celeste stood, adjusted her cardigan like a curtain closing on a very bad play, and stormed out without a word. No farewell, no defense, just silence. And for the first time since I moved in, the neighborhood exhaled. In the weeks that followed Celeste's dramatic exit, the neighborhood began to change. And not just in policy, but in energy. The tension that once lingered in the air like thick humidity began to lift. Neighbors who had barely made eye contact before were suddenly sharing gardening tips over fences. Kids chalked hopscotch trails on sidewalks that had once been patrolled like crime scenes. Someone even painted a cartoon goat on the community bulletin board with a speech bubble that said, "Don't mess with the hose." I couldn't help but laugh when I saw it. My mailbox, one a battlefield for passive-aggressive notes and bogus violations, became a drop box for thank you letters. Some were anonymous. One came with a $50 gift card to the local farm supply store. Apparently, poetic justice paid in both laughter and fertilizer. Even Rick, the new HOA president, a retired lawyer with a fondness for fairness and flannel, asked me to help draft the new community bylaws. I said I'd do it under one condition. We call it the No Celeste Clause. He chuckled and promised to think about it. It felt like the neighborhood was finally beginning to heal. And Celeste? She was nowhere to be seen. Her house sat quietly, her blinds drawn like a stage that had closed after a disastrous performance. But the story wasn't quite finished. Not yet. Because just when we thought the curtain had fallen for good, she tried one last act, and it backfired in the most Celeste way imaginable. Just when the air had started to clear, when the laughter returned and the sprinklers no longer triggered flashbacks, Celeste made her final, desperate move. It came in the form of a neatly folded legal envelope delivered to my door by a very apologetic courier. Inside, a small claims lawsuit, filed under her own name. No HOA backing this time. No board approval. Just her, alone, cornered, and clawing at the last of the control she had left. The charges? Intentional humiliation, emotional sabotage, and my personal favorite, malicious compost-based assault. She claimed I'd orchestrated a campaign of psychological terror by using fertilizer and community gossip. She even attached printouts of neighborhood Facebook memes, including the chicken on the bulletin board and a photo of her covered in compost spray, captioned, "The throne of lies has been dethroned." According to her, I'd turned her into a viral sensation, unwillingly, and caused irreparable social trauma. Honestly, I was impressed with her creativity. We went to court. She arrived in heels and a power suit, clutching her folder like a shield. I wore jeans and boots, holding my binder filled with permits, inspection reports, emails, camera footage, and every laminated sign I had ever posted. The judge didn't even blink after reading through the file. Within 10 minutes, the case was dismissed without hesitation, without fanfare, and without even asking for closing arguments. Celeste stormed out of the courtroom, muttering something about appealing the decision and taking this to a higher authority. But as far as I know, she never filed again. 2 months later, her house went up for sale. The listing was as sanitized as you'd expect. Charming garden, engaged community, unique outdoor features. But everyone knew, everyone remembered. The story of Celeste and the composted consequences was now folklore. As for me, I stayed. The tomatoes grew sweeter that summer. The goats were happy. And peace, real, earned peace, returned to the land. A few months later, I replaced the final sign on my spigot. The new one simply read, "Fertilizer line disconnected, but still maybe don't." So, what started with borrowed hose and a whole lot of entitlement ended with bylaws rewritten, a community reborn, and one very persistent HOA president dethroned by the very compost she inspired. In the end, I didn't need to scream or fight dirty. I just needed patience, proof, and a little agricultural creativity. Celeste thought she could control the narrative. But the truth has deep roots, and once it sprouts, no amount of HOA paperwork can stop it from growing. If you've ever had to deal with a power-tripping neighbor or found yourself in a battle over your own backyard, just remember, sometimes the best revenge is legal, compostable, and absolutely unforgettable. And now we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and whether your neighborhood has a Karen, a Celeste, or maybe, just maybe, a hero with a hose and a plan.